us through this cash shortage to support my normal committee, who would never normally have such a crisis to face. And that has been an absolute godsend for me. And I've learned to become so much more financially eloquent, speaking to the banks about borrowing money, applying for grants. But more than that, the irony really for us summer tracks is that we're now heading for our recovery in the spring, racing restarting, because of course we've had no conference and events through the winter, no Christmas parties, none of that. But the levy board is now beginning to see their reserves running low. And they're suggesting that whilst they've managed to fund January, February, March coming up, by the time we restart, their prize money reserves really are falling through their floor. And we're going to be asked yet again, we'll be the ones, once we restart, to be picking up the pieces and contributing more prize money to the pot. So the problems haven't gone away, and it's a huge worry for us.
Hazel, talking of cash, I think you were delighted, as I'm sure all the CEOs of Scottish racecourses were, to hear the announcement in December of the £2 million injection into Scottish racecourses. How important has that been?
Absolutely phenomenal, incredible. It did cheer up our Christmas without a doubt, let me sleep at night, but probably more important to Perth than any of the other tracks, just as I was explaining. Not that I know the detail of their financial positions, but we do work very closely together, and we have a weekly Zoom just to cheer each other up or shout at each other, depending on what's happening.
But that's quite nice, isn't it? That's nice that, although in a sense you're in competition with each other, that it has brought, if nothing else, this pandemic has brought people in all sorts of industries together. I think that's really quite nice.
It really has, and hopefully we had a wee bit of a reset from that. This hopefully will all give us a greater perspective, and we can look and say, well, we can all enjoy the sport of horse racing. We're very, very privileged, very, very lucky to be involved in it. Going back to your point about the grant, it is phenomenal. It's not something like a grant. You'd normally get a grant from a government to do a special project. This is literally to help fill the hole of the lack of attendances that we've endured during last summer. So Perth was particularly badly hit with the pandemic for nobody else's fault other than our own, and that we had spent a lot of money on big capital projects. All racecourses sort of tend to have 6 to 8 year cycles where they invest or they're saving cash for the next big project. And we'd just spent all our cash. I'd spent more because when I first arrived, I wanted an irrigation scheme that the ground staff could work efficiently with. So that was yet another expenditure off the back of new stables, a new hotel, a new grandstand that Sam had built. So our well was dry, and then a pandemic you would normally expect in a normal year to maybe lose 1 or 2 fixtures for waterlogging or whatever, but to lose a whole year just was not in anybody's projections, and was in a massive shock. So even though we've got this grant, we can approach 2021 with more confidence, but we definitely need those vaccinations to come in super quick.
Absolutely. And, we talked about Perth racing from April to September. What would you normally be doing at this time of year? And there must be additional things you're doing because of the pandemic. But as CEO, when you're not racing, just give us a little bit of a flavour of sort of things. Is it all sort of financial planning for the year ahead?
That would have probably happened in the autumn. So budgets are set before Christmas and things. And by now we would have been right into the selling. So we'd be getting very excited. I'd expect to have sold 50% of our capacity already in attendances and hospitality by now. So that would be going full flow. And it's a really positive time. And I still am actually recontracting all our suppliers, arranging contra deals, thinking what the angles will be in terms of the stories. That keeps changing because the pandemic keeps changing, of course. And at this time of year, I quite enjoy giving each of my staff just time to sense check where they are in terms of an annual appraisal, if you like, give them some positive feedback. It's been a real privilege to take on it's a very continuous team, if you like. It's a permanent team. Most of them have done at least 10 years at Perth, if not. Our head groundsman's done over 40. So that's really nice to be able to do that. I mean, we say Perth Racecourse is their employer. I think that we feel we're more of a family. So it's very important that I know they're all happy in their work. And that's a nice time of year to do that in January when you're starting out with yet another year.
Well, it sounds like you're building up, or at least maintaining and promoting good morale at Perth Racecourse. Now, you mentioned, Hazel, that you were on the RCA, the Racecourse Association board, since, I think, August of last year. What's the mood with this pandemic of racecourses in general and Scottish courses in particular?
Big question. Yeah, we've been through an absolute roller coaster together. Perhaps it's brought us all closer together. I think it has when you have a challenge that we're all sharing. But just as we were thinking it was getting better before Christmas, and there were some pilots planned, yet more pilots, it's got significantly worse again, unfortunately. So I dial into a weekly call that the RCA organised through Caroline Davis at the RCA, and it's for racecourse senior management to share best practice. And you do get a good barometer of the mood of the respective camps. It's every Wednesday morning, and we've seen all the racecourses take their turn to start out with racing behind closed doors, which was a daunting prospect with all the protocols, the unknowns, having to get through your safety advisory groups locally. And the operational planning involved. And so it could be a bit overwhelming. So that was a great source of support. But just recently, I'd have to admit that there's a lot of strained faces on it just now, because we're just wondering when on earth is this ever going to end? And we'd all had a kind of hope for crowds quicker than what they're likely to be now.
And Hazel, being an independent racecourse, does that have its own challenges?
Very much so. The scale of things alone, because we don't have such a big pot to fall back on, and also the flexibility. There was some really smart moves that the Jockey Club were able to make to mothball Carlisle for a while, just because it makes more economic sense, get more of their staff furloughed. We've all made use of the furlough thing, but sitting on the RCA board, it's become clearer and clearer to me. I've learned so much since my time in August, but the groups are just able to have that much more adaptability, more resources behind them. So that's where the Racecourse Association has really come into own, supporting the smaller independents who just don't have that level of resource.
Now, I have to admit, I haven't had the pleasure of going to Perth Racecourse yet, but I know Phil Boyle, Phil has been, and obviously we're both in syndicates, and there are issues there in terms of syndicates and racecourses and a pandemic. So, Phil, perhaps you ought to come in here because you've been to Perth and I haven't.
I have been to Perth. I didn't have much of a syndicate experience because I couldn't persuade too many of my shareholders to make the long trip up. But I was there myself. I'll certainly bring some more up next time because we had a really good day. I won't talk you through the flight cancellation on the way home and the overnight drive back to Surrey, but I had to hire a car at 11 o'clock at night at Edinburgh Airport and drive home, which was not an experience I'm seeking to repeat. But yeah, Simon and I are both on the committee of the Racehorse Syndicates Association, and I was pleased to hear you say earlier about sort of the reset and people being keen to work together and work in partnership, because that's definitely something through the RSA that we strongly believe in. I think we kind of got frustrated by a lot of people seeming to sort of dig themselves in and not sort of want to work together on things, really fighting their own corner too much. But one of the things we recognise is that obviously, we're delighted that syndicates are a big growth area of ownership, but that does seem to put a bit of pressure on racecourses, because obviously that's 20 people turning up for one horse rather than the traditional method, which was a couple of people maybe. Have you noticed that as an issue, and have you got any ideas about how courses might sort of cope with that going forwards once we get people back onto the course?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting language you use, coping. I mean, we should be absolutely welcoming it with open arms, because these syndicates are bringing new fans, true fans, because they're spending their hard-earned, into the sport. So if our facilities are seen to be too small, I mean, what a lovely problem to have. It would be a great shame if there were only a couple of owners in there rattling around. So the owners and trainers at Perth is quite legendary, really. There's been some major parties in there after racing, but it is a little bit small. I don't know if our new extended decking area had been built when you were up, Phil, but that's helped. It now extends into the pre-parade ring and gives them an outdoor area, which was very popular during the behind closed doors, where they could just sit out and enjoy the fresh air in a bit of space. But I would hate anyone to think that it's a problem that there are too many people coming racing with a share in a racehorse. That seems all back to front to me. So I commend you in all the work that you're doing. And if there's a short-term logistical problem, then we can address that, as you say, working together. But at no time ever making any syndicate manager or member feel unwelcome, because if you manage to get into racehorse ownership, especially at this time, not only will it be a very fulfilling experience, but you are actually propping up the industry as we are right now, because without the owners, we have absolutely nothing. And I think people are appreciating now that these owners, if it wasn't for them, we don't have any product, we don't have any attendances at the moment. So without any product, we don't have any betting income. It's made it clearer than ever that we absolutely rely on owners to keep the whole circus going. So I just doff my hat to all that you're doing and encourage you and all the race courses to make sure that we're as hospitable as possible when you do come to the racetracks.
Well, that's lovely, Hazel. You've got obviously a really positive and passionate attitude towards your job, and also music to fills in my ears to syndication. 3 New Year wishes. If I was to ask you for 3 wishes that you would have for whether it be racing in general or Perth Racecourse, what would be 3 things that, on your wish list you'd like to see happen during 2021?
Well, every racecourse manager would say the same thing: to be able to welcome crowds back, get the whole thing going again. Because behind closed door experience, if you've done it, it's fairly miserable.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So we definitely need that to happen, and we will appreciate it so much more than we ever did in the past, I think. So that would be my main one, and very, very obvious. We touched on the reset, and I think people should be a bit more compassionate with each other, and all stakeholders should just be rejoicing that we all love racing and horse racing, and maybe find less to bicker about. So that would be lovely. And then I'm actually hoping that we're going to have another Scottish trained winner of the Grand National. So yeah, One for Arthur did it relatively recently, 2017, I think. So I'm thinking there are a few dark horses in there, and if there's a crowd at entry to cheer at home, well, that would be great, because that would mean that the April Festival at Perth could maybe also enjoy a bit of a crowd. But I shall not start trying to second guess this virus, because it's worn me out with trying to plan around it. So we'll just see what is, and what shall be shall be.
Well, they sound really 3 very good, optimistic and hopefully achievable wishes for New Year. Look, it just leaves me to really thank you for your time. It's been a real pleasure to have you on, and we can tell, Phil and I, that you're very passionate about your job. Seems like you've got a really good family team up at Perth, and really good luck to you and all your team at Perth for a very successful and prosperous and happy 2021. Thank you, Hazel.
It's extremely kind. Thank you, Simon and Phil. Thank you.
What a lovely guest Hazel was, Phil. I know we're really lucky to get her, because she's very busy at the moment, so probably dashing off to another Zoom. So, no, lovely guest, and really lucky to have her on.
Yeah, and really interesting. I didn't realise sort of some of her background and what she does at the racecourse. So, yeah, really enjoyed that, and I hope we can get a similarly interesting guest next month and carry on building our listenership. And so I suppose I ought to repeat to people about asking them to subscribe and follow our podcast and give us a rating and a review, because that will all help with that. And yeah, we'll be back next month with a similarly interesting guest, I hope.
Well, all it leaves me to do is to thank you, Phil Boyle, our producer, Callum Ronan from Callum Ronan Creative, our special guest, Hazel Peplinski, the RSA, the Racehorse Syndicates Association, for sponsoring this podcast, and you, the listeners. This is Simon Double saying, until next time, thank you for listening and stay safe.